In the previous session, I finished the requirements of the project. From the requirements, in the next step, we have to determine the scope. So what is the project scope? What is the scope statement? What tools can be used to create the scope statement? What is the difference between a predictive and an adaptive environment? And at the end of the session, I will have a look at an example for which I will define the scope. In this example, I will consider a small family house to be built. Let's have a look at the scope. The scope is part of the scope management processes that are defined in the PMBOK. We can make a distinction between product scope and project scope. But in general, when we talk about scope, it includes the product and the project scope. The product scope relates to the product itself. What are the functions and characteristics that have to be present in the end product? How will we use the scope, or what scope will we use to get this realized? The project scope refers to the project work, deliverables, reporting, and so on. So in general, when we talk about scope, it relates to all the work that has to be completed to meet the requirements that have been set by the client and the sponsors. The scope has to contain the acceptance criteria, and it has to define the exclusions, what is not included in the scope. The definition of the project scope or the scope in general may be very iterative depending on the type of project management environment we are working in. The scope statement describes the major deliverables, the assumptions, the constraints, and the exclusions. It's the basis for a more detailed planning of the work. At the end of the scope statement, we also have the scope baseline that will be used during execution to verify that the work has been completed according to the specifications. What is not included in the scope statement shan't be done. Whenever a stakeholder, the client or whoever, asks for something to be done that it's not part of the scope statement or the baseline, you have to refer them to the change management or the change control processes. Every new element to be added to the scope has to be approved before it can be completed. The deliverables relate to the products, the service or results that have to be completed during the project or the project phase, and it includes deliverables related to the project like reports and documentations. Exclusions is what is not included, and this is a very important element to manage because it relates to stakeholders' expectations. Stakeholders may assume that some items are included in the project. And here in the scope statement, you have to clearly define what is and what is not part of the project. We can use different tools to create the scope statement. First of all, we have expert judgment. We can use data analysis techniques, for example, like alternative analysis. Decision making is a very important tool and is composed of many tools like multi-criterion decision making, decision-making methods, and so on. We look at interpersonal and team skills, which can be done like facilitation in workshops. And finally, we have product analysis, which composed of project or product breakdown, requirement analysis, systems analysis and engineering, and value analysis and engineering. When we consider a predictive and an adaptive environment, we have to see what the differences are between those two. A predictive environment is characterized by a scope definition at the beginning of the project. Changes are progressively managed, and all scope management processes are done at the beginning of the project. Verification and control of the deliverables is done at the end, and there is a very strict change management to be sure that the project is manageable. In an adaptive environment, however, there is a high level of change. The scope is composed or decomposed in a product backlog, and at each iteration, the requirements are collected, the scope for that iteration is defined, and a small WBS is created. In an adaptive environment, there is a continuous engagement of the stakeholders, and it is driven by continuous and flexible changes. Let's have a look at the family house. What are the deliverables? We want to have a 150 square meter fully finished family house. There have to be 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a garage for 2 mid-sized cars, and here may be some uncertainty what we define as mid-sized cars. It depends on the country or the region you may be living. We want to have a fully equipped kitchen. We want to have a washing room and a home automation system for house management. We can define some milestones for this project. Permits to be completed by April the 15th. The work has to be starting by May the 1st. The foundations to be completed by June the 1st. Structural work completed by August 31st. Construction windproofed and dry by September the 30th, and completed and final inspection by December 31st. A nice New Year's gift. Let's have a look at some technical specifications we define in the scope statement. The house has to be compliant with the passive house concept. The windows have to comply, of course, with passive housing and have to have less than 0.6 watt per square meter and per Kelvin. The acoustic isolation has to be larger than 30 decibel. The structure has to be done according to the norms applicable for that region. There is rainwater recuperation and sewage water treatment. There are some limits and exclusions defined in this project. The contractor will receive the approved floor plans and technical details from the architect. The stability calculations and dimension of structural elements have to be provided by the contractor. The appliances for the kitchen and washing room are not included, although we specified a fully equipped kitchen. We still keep the appliances out of the solution. The contractor has the full responsibility for all the techniques, construction, electricity, water, heating, and so on. Working hours are from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. and only on work days. So, we finished the part of the scope statement, scope management, very important. Now we can continue with the remaining of the project. We will build the work breakdown structure. We will identify the work packages. And finally, at the end of this section, we will know what activities have to be completed to complete the project. Great job. See you at the next session. Thank you.